Welcome back to Inside Criminal Minds, the series dedicated to analyzing an elite FBI team. If you are new to this series, there is a link in the description down below to catch you up. This episode begins with a recap of the last episode, with the team figuring out that Tobias is the Unsub that has dissociative identity disorder, and Reid being caught by Tobias. The song that plays here in the beginning of this episode is perfect. It's Symphony for the Devil by the Rolling Stones. And even though it feels overplayed now, it is the perfect way to start this episode with the cops and the team arriving at Tobias's house. The song really punctuates these scenes perfectly. When they arrive, they begin by searching the barn, and among the dead dogs, sad, they find a terrified JJ waving her gun around until Morgan and Prentice are able to calm her down. Upon rewatching this episode, I realized that every reaction to this unsub is extremely genuine to their character. JJ is paranoid almost this entire episode and even shows some PTSD and guilt. Later, Hotch tries to blame the fact that he isn't the best at teaching emotionally. Morgan lashes out in anger because Reid is basically a brother to him. Gideon tries to, as best as possible, keep the team focused on the job and be a little bit of a father slash mentor figure to Reid, with Garcia attempting to keep people's humanity the only way she knows how, and Reid is using his intelligence and profiling skills to try to gain an upper hand. Anyway, Morgan checks the field and finds a sign of a struggle and drag marks, but no Reid and no Tobias, as Gideon and Hotch clear the house. This is when we see a brief scene of Tobias with Reid hidden while escaping in his truck. While JJ receives medical attention, the cop from the first episode reveals that Tobias asks for directions to a motel. However, Tobias doesn't go towards it. And I mean, honestly, Tobias asking for directions to a motel when he has lived here his entire life in the same area, down to the fact that he's in the exact same house, why on earth would he need to ask for direction? This was basically just to lead the team away from him to make his escape, which not only works, but actually makes sense. The team is so hell-bent on catching him, they don't even stop to think about him creating a diversion. Also, during this, we get a bit of insight on Tobias's father and his teachings through a flashback. He explains to Tobias the power of hunting and how his mind should be while he was doing it, showing he did try to be a father, but he was just a bit too insane. But that leads to Tobias's cabin, where he, as Raphael, is cooking livers to ward off evil spirits, which honestly sounds more pagan than Christian. But we see Reid tied to a chair when Raphael begins his questioning of Reid's abilities and even accuses him of being a devil or at least a demon. Then Raphael plays an extremely dangerous game of Russian roulette where the only contestant is Reid, and luckily it lands on an open cylinder. The next morning, Hotch picks up Garcia to profile the house.
Think of the house as a witness. If it could talk, what would it tell us?
I guess it tell us to get the hell out.
So the team set up a field office in Tobias's home, and unfortunately, they have not gotten any good new information, but are combing through his journals to learn a bit about this unsub psyche. If only they had a speed reading super genius. Oh yeah. Garcia then goes over Tobias's setup and how he is surprisingly intelligent when it comes to computers, but it doesn't fit Tobias's profile, at least as the unsub. However, they do stumble across potential victims with live feeds in their house categorized by their sin when Morgan and Garcia have this exchange.
Yeah, but Reid's completely innocent.
But if you dig deep enough on any of us, we all have our sins, including Reid.
And he is correct. Nobody is perfect, unfortunately, including Reid. And I love how this episode slowly feeds information about Reid throughout it. Next, Tobias startles Reid awake when he returns from getting firewood. This time, Tobias is in his father's persona, and Reid attempts to gain his favor, but the father sees right through this and proceeds to punish Reid for lying. Reid then attempts to woo him by reciting the Bible, and
Devil knows how to read, too.
it also doesn't go well, and so Reid is flogged on his feet to entice him to confess a sin he did not commit. And this really is the first time Reid is faced with these kinds of struggles, and he is handling it surprisingly well. Back at the house, Prentice finds Narcotics Anonymous meeting dates, which could be a potential lead, when Gideon finds behind the wallpaper the words "Honor thy father" written countless times in Latin on the wall. Yeah, the father was really this insane. JJ's cleaning up when she sees another dog, and this turns out to be just her imagination. However, she does get snapped out of it pretty quickly by Prentice, who oddly hasn't shown signs of distress in this horrifying job. Even Hotch agrees that she is unflappable. This alludes to the Lauren Reynolds storyline further in the series. But not only that, Prentice invites JJ to leave the house, which is probably the best thing for her right now. But as they finish, Morgan finds a storm cellar, and when investigating it, they find the father dead but on ice. Next, Tobias returns to the cabin with food and recognizes the abuse from his father and begins to give Reid drugs to alleviate the pain. It works, but also sends Reid into a flashback of his father preparing to leave him and his mother. And just look at how adorable little Reid looks. Also, he's quick at spouting out facts, which is very characteristic of Reid.
Statistically, children who grow up in two-parent households attain 3 more years of higher education than children from single-parent households.
But all in all, this is just a sad moment because this is the day his father leaves for good, which is probably one of the worst things about Reid's father. I mean, honestly, somebody with schizophrenia, you just decide to up and leave to take care of a child, not cool. However, at the end of this, he repeats a mantra, "I am not weak," which does help Reid through this until he is interrupted by Tobias as his father. He explains the predicament Reid is in, also showing they are in a cemetery, which will be important soon enough. Then the cops show back up to the house with the information on the father's death, as JJ and Prentice talk with Tobias's sponsor from Narcotics Anonymous. And we find out Tobias was addicted to Dilaudid.
Drugstore heroin.
This is eye-opening to just how bad the father was, because Tobias needed something this strong to get away from him. And it also shows that CPS should have been called to protect this child. Anyway, the sponsor reveals more about the father and how after the father was cheated on, it became his stressor that radicalized him, which kind of makes sense. Double down on religion to alleviate the pain of a loss. This is how the team finds out about the constant abuse Tobias received as a child. Also, they learn Tobias is a recluse by nature. At the house, Morgan discovers a journal that seems to be written by the father in an almost sermon-like way. Hotch also finds a journal written by Tobias himself talking about killing his father, who was already dead. Morgan theorizing the father persona fought with Tobias for control. This leads the team to determine one of the personas is the father, the other the son, and the other an archangel who is just trying to do God's will. Morgan then meets with Garcia in order to gain any intel using the father's name, which shows what they initially thought they would find on his computer. Basically, violence and destruction to fuel his determination to rid the world of sinners. At the cabin, the father persona has taken over and uses his stolen computers and camera equipment. He shows the team Reid, and for the first time since the capture, at least they know Reid is still alive, but worse for wear. The team watches as the father forces Reid to choose his next victim, and Reid,
won't choose who gets slaughtered and have you leave their remains behind like a poacher.
This sends the father straight to the moon with anger, who manhandles Reid until Reid decides on who is going to survive the slaughter. And the father reveals her info so the team can save her immediately after Raphael takes over and shuts the feed down. Also, I love how much Morgan is angry at this, almost slamming his fist through the door, showing just how much he actually cares for Reid. Then the camera does an amazing match cut from the computer webcam to inside the next victim's house, where Reid is forced to watch Raphael murder a man and a woman, but not before Raphael calls 911 again. The team arrive to the poor couple's demise. Gideon notices the webcam and gives a message to Reid.
If you're watching, you're not responsible for this. You understand me? He's perverting God to justify murder. You are stronger than him. He cannot break you.
Honestly, this just shows how good Gideon is at trying to protect Reid, even though they are far apart from each other. At the house, JJ needs some validation, so she attempts to get it from Morgan, and Morgan shows through his actions and words that JJ needs to figure this out on her own. And honestly, this scene does need to exist. JJ isn't a profiler. She's a media liaison. She's been thrown into this troubling part, and she's trying to get some guidance from somebody who she sees as a friend. And unfortunately, Morgan knows all too well that the best way for her to get over this is by herself. But it is good to see how much JJ feels guilt for leaving Reid. Hotch and Gideon discuss Reid briefly, but this scene in particular shows an introspective side to Hotch we rarely see and we haven't seen before, which is good for his character. Also, Gideon reassuring Hotch Reid is going to be okay shows his experience and how he is trying to keep the team together despite the loss of a team member. At the cabin, Tobias injects Reid again with Dilaudid. Even though Reid pleads Tobias to help him escape, and ironically, Tobias does help him escape reality, just not the cabin. We get another flashback with Reid attempting to help his mother, but it doesn't work. So he gets her to read Proust. Back at the house, JJ demands to watch the latest victims, and this is where Garcia tries to dissuade her because she doesn't want JJ to go down the wrong path and to keep her humanity in check, which I think is perfect for her character. Morgan and Prentice review the family history and reveal child services did actually pay a visit, but I guess they were ran off by the dad. And Morgan figures out that Tobias would choose where to go if he was being chased, because the father typically stood up and fought anybody who was quote unquote attacking them. This is interrupted by JJ, who reveals the latest murder was posted, and despite Garcia's best efforts, she can't remove it from the internet.
I don't understand. Why can't we shut it down?
Because I can't pinpoint his IP
So
address.
just remove it once he sends it.
It's the internet, sir. Once something's out there, you can never take it back.
Entire history, man. You can't undo anything.
However, Garcia figures out a different route and flags the video as being a virus, significantly reducing the crowd watching. This does anger Tobias, and even though Reid is attempting to get on Tobias's good side, Tobias plays back the Gideon message from before. This is when Tobias, as his father, reprimands Reid and finds out he has been using drugs, which sends Tobias into a furious rage, where Reid is smacked around until Reid falls backwards, sending him into convulsions. And this could very well be the end of Reid. Next, we see firsthand Tobias arguing with his father, as Gideon is racked with guilt for potentially getting his colleague killed. And the parallels of this scene is just incredible. The fact that Gideon is fighting his own personal demons while Tobias is fighting his father just shows just how good this episode is, especially the writing. Eventually, Tobias wins out and is able to save Reid by administering CPR. Luckily, the team see, and Reid notices headstones to help him determine where he is, which is just a great way to utilize this scene in particular. It shows that Reid is constantly trying to figure out ways to relay messages to his team without Tobias picking up on it. This is when the team realized they can figure out the radius of where the previous murder was and figure out the small part where he could potentially be. Then Raphael takes charge and asks Reid to choose one of the people on his team to die. And Raphael continues that game of Russian roulette until Reid names Hotch to die, with a completely genius move by falsely accusing Hotch of narcissism to get his attention. Also, Tobias fires the gun, showing just how close Reid was to being killed. But also, Reid misquotes the Bible in order to help his team find out where he is. At the house, Hotch asks the team to list his flaws, and not one of them said narcissism. And Hotch reveals that Reid misquoted the Bible in order to send a coded message to them, telling them that he's in a cemetery. And Reid doing this is just top tier character development. I cannot stress this enough of how good this episode was written and paced. This is probably one of the best episodes ever. This is when the team uses this and some of Reid's earlier comments to determine the location. Then Tobias helps Reid drink, and Reid probes for information to be sure he gave the right clues to his team. And the look of relief and happiness on Reid's face tells an entire story just by itself. Then Tobias drugs Reid again. This time, his memory of Reid is hospitalizing his mother, which is so gut-wrenching. He feels so bad. He finally confesses his sin to Tobias, the father.
And he that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death.
And he decides that Reid needs to dig his own grave. This is when the team find the cabin without Tobias or Reid and decide to look for him on foot. This is when Reid distracts Tobias long enough for him to get the gun and shoot him, forcing the team to converge on his position. It's sad to see Tobias as the final persona, especially in Reid's face. You see how his feelings of betrayal, and then they bookend the episode with yet another perfect song, The Funeral by Band of Horses. It just perfectly encapsulates what's happening in this scene as Reid meets back up with his team. And we see a happily ever after. Also, it's interesting that Reid hugs Hotch first, showing that he didn't really mean what he said in the cabin. And then, of course, he hugs JJ as kind of I understand where we were at. This was the best play we could have done. All right, this is the episode. And honestly, this episode was great. Wait a second. Hold up. Reid is stealing the drugs from Tobias. Man, this is going to be in the next at least couple episodes to the rest of the series. But I'm not going to get into it that much right now. That'll happen towards the next couple of episodes. And honestly, I didn't see this coming initially. And man, what a roller coaster of emotion. With Reid missing, it was a lot harder to figure out the unsub and solve this case. As stated earlier, the team members had a unique reaction to this unsub and his ability to be one step ahead of them up until the final moment. I'm glad Reid was able to get his revenge on the father persona, but man, it felt bad to see Tobias asking about his mother in his last few seconds of life. Because even though she left him, he still remembers the good life that he had before she left. Also really enjoyed learning about Reid's backstory. Always good to see his mother reprise her role. Also, the drug use is going to be a constant problem throughout this series, especially in the next following episodes. All in all, this episode is a tour de force. It gets the characters right, the stakes are realistic and high. The tension is so palpable, you can cut it with a knife. This is one of the greatest episodes in the whole series. I can't sing its praise any more than I already have. And also, James Van Der Beek knocked it out of the park as Tobias, portraying three people seamlessly is no easy task. And honestly, if I ever become a director, he is going to be my number one pick. My number two pick is Johnny Depp, but that's for a whole different reason. Thank you for watching. If you're curious on how a spy works after he is fired, check out Burned Notice, my other series. Link in the description. And as always, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.